from the university, all well connected, all swinging much bigger political hammers than Jim or I ever will. And that partnership that we formed in January of 2018 has proved to be a very workable, a very good partnership. Talk to you a little bit about funding and tell you a short story about funding. We spoke first to a local foundation at a breakfast at Crazy Cats, and we were having a lovely time. And I was explaining what we wanted to raise the money for and where we were going to spend the money first at dam number 2. And he said, well, what happens after the shad get past dam number 2? And he had previously said, well, I am in fully support of this. I'll be delighted to support you. And I asked him for $250,000, which I thought was a modest amount. And he said, well, we can help you with that. And then he asked the question, what are you going to do after the shad gets past number 2? And I said, well, we haven't really thought about that. He said, well, then I won't help you. I said, well, what about the promise you made over your first cup of coffee? And he said, well, what you're talking about here, fella, is building a bridge to nowhere. And that phrase caused us to re-examine our plans to remove the dams kind of as the money became available. And we thought it would be it made much more sense, and it would solve this guy's bridge to nowhere problem if we planned to remove the dams near simultaneously, which I must tell you has never been done on the East Coast before. So if we are successful in getting it done near simultaneously between now and the end of 3 years from now, it'll be a thing to be proud of. That year, with respect to funding, we received $241,000 from the bond bill for the state of Delaware. An additional $241,000 was the match from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. And we were off and running and pretty pleased with ourselves, I can promise you. With respect to more funding, this is funding 2.0. Now we're in 2020. COVID crushed us. We got no money from anybody except for the DuPont company, who pledged $230,000 to remove their dam number 6, which is, as you remember your map, is the X Station Dam. So you go over the Rising Sun Bridge, you look down to the right, and you can just out of sight there is the DuPont X Station Dam. So we didn't get much funding done, obviously, in last year, but this year, 2021, funding 3.0, we hit the jackpot. And our money has become no money, no mission. We are laser focused on the fact that this is going to cost a great deal more money than we ever thought it was going to cost. And so our motto now is taken from that pithy phrase written on the walls of the Mayo Clinic: no money, no mission. And that interest in the money is echoed by our Senators Carper and Coons, who announced yesterday that they both support the Delaware River Restoration Fund. And that fund just made grants to 4 states, New York, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and New Jersey. All are washed by the waters of the Delaware River. And the total grants were $11.5 million. And there's a match necessary to receive those funds. And the match was about $13 million. Brandywine Shad got an additional $445,000 from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. That money came from the Delaware River Restoration Fund. They are the administrators of those monies. And these funds that we just received will permit the beginning of our opportunity to remove or modify dams number 3, 4, 5, and 6. 6 again is the X Station Dam. So why are we making this effort? Well, we want to be on the right side of history. In 2019, across the nation, and there's about 97,000 dams that are still up. That probably includes dams like the Grand Coulee and other modest structures. There were 90 taken out in 2019. From 89 to 2019, 1,476 came out. So we want to be part of that effort to do the right thing by the fish and by the environment. So we get, if you think about a stool and the 3 legs on the stool, we're talking about the restoration of our most famous or most historic river, the Brandywine. We restore habitat. We get cooler water because without the dams, there's no longer a pool of water that heats during the summertime. That's good for fish. The dams, elimination of the dams improves oxygenation of the water, and it encourages the anadromous fish to swim up past these dams to spawn in their historic waters in freshwater Delaware, freshwater here in the state of Delaware, and further upstream in the freshwater in Pennsylvania. This hasn't happened, and remember this hasn't happened since Samuel Kirk built his first bank-to-bank dam in 1720. It's been 301 years since the fish have swum free up the Brandywine to spawn. So what else do you get besides restoration? You get education, schools for schools. You get the kids raising shad eggs from the eggs to little shiners that they then release into the Brandywine. Big deal. They love this. It was a huge success in this in the Potomac watershed, and we're getting help from the people that organized that. You get a retelling of the story of the Lenape, I beg your pardon, Lenape Indians. Those Native Americans who depended upon the fish for their sustenance, for their livelihood. They caught them in the millions and dried them for the winter and ate them while they were catching them in the summertime. And when the shad disappeared because Mr. Kirk built his dam, the Indians petitioned, that was 1720. The Indians petitioned William Penn and his governors, and they promised that they would do something about it. And then they were talked out of that tree by the industrialists who needed the dams to produce wheat and flour and corn and hammer iron and all the things that dams did for the colonial industrialists at the time. You will also get a recreation. You get fishing and canoeing and kayaking, and something that everybody's talking about called environmental justice. Environmental justice, as I understand it, is that because this is an urban river, and many of the people that live in the urban community through which the river passes haven't had the opportunity to enjoy the Brandywine. And this refocusing the public attention on the Brandywine and its importance will help us do that. So that's a lot of dry history. So this section is no more calls. We have a winner. The city removed dam number 1, which was just upstream from the Market Street Bridge, to identify it for you. And it was nothing more than a a pair of 24-inch water mains that was cased in concrete. And it was set on the river bottom and it stuck up above the water, maybe that much. But because it was there, the shad never got past it. Now, there are, for those of you who golf, there's a story about golfers, and the quote goes, a golfer is one who sets forth at dawn, and when he returns at sunset, the truth is not in him. The truth is not in him. And this is true for fishermen too. So there was the stories about fishing for shad below dam number 1 were everywhere. People were catching them. They were this big and they were this big. And you'd think about the golfers. We didn't know if that was true or not. So the dam that came out in November of 2019, and we all collectively held our breath, because if we were reading the tea leaves right, the fish would swim through the brackish water at dam number 1, another 0.6 of a mile upstream to dam number 2, which hadn't been touched, and they would spawn in the thousands right there. And proof of life, they did. We caught 159 in a seine net of the little tiny fingerling shad. This was probably in July, after they'd spawned in April, May, and June. And we caught adults who were spawned out at the same time. And this year we did the same exercise. And I can't tell you that there were more shad in the river, but the fishermen tell me, never the golfer, the fishermen tell me that they were catching them every time they throw a line, they catch a shad. That was that good. So this is proof of life. This means that our plan will work. We get the dams down, we get the shad upstream, and they will spawn, and they will return to our native river, and they will reproduce, and that's a good thing. So, that's it.
So let me just say, if you have any questions, ready to take questions?
Absolutely.
Let's take some audience first. Audience first, and then we can do some Zoom questions. Okay, David.
Okay. You were talking about dam number 1. Okay, and when they took it, was there any purpose to that particular dam?
The dam encased. The dam encased 2 24-inch water mains that carry the water from the pumping plant up the hill to Porter Reservoir. So those pipes had been leaking for decades. They demolished those pipes, dug a trench in the bedrock of the river, and replaced the pipes below the surface of the water, so the shad can now swim upstream.
Any other audience questions? Terry.
Number 2 then.
Wait a minute. Let Terry go.
Will you be breaching dams or taking them out completely? Oh, did not come in.
So the question was, will we breach dams, remove them, or modify them for fish passage? And the answer is yes. In some areas, such as Hagley, these dams cannot be removed because they tell Hagley's story and they are on the National Register. So they must be modified for passage. And there are ways to do that successfully, Terry. Yeah.
So I gather that dam number 2 is the one that feeds the waterworks channel. That one has an old broken down fish ladder in it, and I don't know if that ever worked the way it was intended. What's your intention for that one?
The best way to get the largest percentage of fish past an important inviolable It's a 10-footer. Yeah, it's a 10-footer. And the best way to do that is to build what they call a rock ramp. Rock ramp spans most of the frontage of the dam facing downriver. And it goes on, it starts maybe 200 feet from the toe of the dam, and you build it slowly up to it. And there's a series of pools and weirs in the. The question was, will they reestablish the old fish ladder? The answer is no, they will not.
Don't know how close. So from Gail and Fred, they want to know how big are the shad that the Gulfer fishermen are finding?
The shad average about 3 pounds, and adults can get up to 5 to 7 pounds. And after they run to the sea when they're fingerlings, they don't return as adults to spawn for at least 3 years. And you'll be interested to know, perhaps, that shad don't just exist here on the Brandywine. They start at the St. John's River in Florida, and they go all the way to Nova Scotia. And they enter these rivers all up and down the East Coast at different times of year, but always starting in the late winter and running through early summer.
We were informed by.
Hold it, hold it, hold it.
I would just like to add to that we were informed by Jim Cummins, who's probably had more success in restoring shad migration anywhere in the United States. He's a professor and he's an advocate and down in the Potomac. And he's been helping us and advising us greatly. And when he was up here and we were catching the shad in order to support the Shad in Schools program that Hunter was referring to, is that he noted that our shad in the Brandywine were larger than the shad in the Potomac. Not a scientific conclusion, but he has he told me he has caught over 20,000 shad in order to capture the eggs for it. So so I was sort of proud that we here in Little Delaware had the biggest shad, at least in his experience.
What is the water quality of the Brandywine and how safe is it to eat shad and other fish that are caught in it?
I can't answer the first question because I'm not a scientist. I'm an English major. But my co-director, Mr. Shanahan, swims in the Brandywine, and he looks all right.
I have checked it out.
But the answer to the question, can you eat the shad? The answer is yes. And the reason is when they enter the Delaware River and begin their migration from the Atlantic Ocean, they don't eat. They have fat reserves and they live on the fat reserves. So whatever nasties and fushties are living in the Brandywine, they do not consume that particular item.
And one more question from Zoom, and that is, how about smaller creeks being open to shad? For instance, the Naaman's Creek has one dam to remove now that the steel mill is gone.
I hadn't changed my focus on the Brandywine since 2017, but if we are successful in bringing America's founding fish, and that's what it's called, to Delaware's most historic river, then by God, we will get to Naaman's Creek and see about that.
So I will say that I have been told that there were shad up behind Westover Hills and some of those little creeks that came up the Christina that's not dammed, and that they were actually seen in some of the smaller creeks that are sort of behind Barley Mill Road. So I wasn't there, but a friend told me that he saw shad there. Another question, when I heard a lecture on this in 2005, one of the arguments was that one thing that really cleans the Brandywine are freshwater clams. And that the larvae of the freshwater or mussels, okay, and the larvae are carried up in the gills of the shad. And so historically they're what like 300 per square meter, and now there's about 2 per square meter. And so one of the ideas was that when the shad would return, you'd also have this increase in filter feeders on the bottom, which would also do a lot to clean the river.
I'm sorry to say that some of that is true, but the shad don't play a part in that. They are not a natural, what they call a vector. However, you're correct in that if the dams are removed, a shad mussel vector does appear, and that's the American eel. And the eels do carry the mussel spat. I don't know what it's called, the little tiny mussels. And they swim up to the next bed, and then they shed them. And so that's how mussels get spread through the Brandywine. You'll be interested to know with respect to mussels that in Bartram's Gardens, there is a test case for a mussel hatchery it was built, I think, 2 years ago, and funded by the William Penn Foundation and the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. When it's fully mature, they will produce 500,000 mussel spat a year that people can buy and put them in Naaman's Creek. And we can buy them and put them in the Brandywine. The mussels themselves filter, I can't remember whether it's 10 gallons of water a day or a gallon an hour, but they are mad filterers of water. They clean everything. And having them established up in the Brandywine, again, will be a huge benefit. And that is another benefit of dam removal or dam modification.
Yeah, there's a couple more on Zoom. People are interested. Okay, are there any other native fish that will benefit from the dam removals?
Great question. The anadromous fishes that, like the shad, live in the Atlantic and migrate here to spawn include the striped bass, include the Atlantic sturgeon, include the hickory shad and alewives. All these are members of the herring family. And the glass eel, the American eel, is another one that will benefit. The question from the audience was the blueback herring, which is endangered, will also benefit from this dam removal activity.
Have you seen the documentary Damnation? And what do you think of it? Do you know it?
I have not.
Okay. Maybe I can get the person asking, John, on Zoom. Would you just type into the chat what your impression of it is? And the other question I have while he's doing that is there any monitoring of the mussels and eels in the Brandywine, like a baseline over time?
Baseline monitoring is part of the science that these grants are paying for. And we have formed an association with a guy by the name of Dr. Ed Hale at the Sea Grant College down in, it's part of the University of Delaware. It's headquartered, I think, down in Lewis. And Ed is not only doing a survey on the Atlantic sturgeon, but he's also agreed to help us monitor the shad. It was he who taught us how to deploy a seine net, and it was he who counted the 160 fingerling shad in the spring of 2000. So the answer to that question is absolutely yes.
Currently, this documentary is an award-winning documentary called Damnation. It does a fabulous job showing the before and after life of fish in waters that have or had dams.
All right. So, and as a way to close, well, no, wait, would you like to hear anything about the Quakers? Okay. So I'm going to read you Irene's opening introductory panel on the Miller's tale on the Miller's Trail. In the 1740s, along the banks of the Brandywine, Quaker millers began erecting large stone mills, most of them just downstream, close to the Market Street Bridge, to grind high-quality wheat from Delaware and Pennsylvania into the finest flour then available. These Quaker millers created the first great industry in the 13 original colonies by milling the staple that they named Brandywine superfine flour. And this essential product turned tiny Brandywine Village. Everybody know where Brandywine Village is? Okay, Brandywine Village is, you leave downtown on Market Street, you cross the Brandywine on Market Street Bridge, you're in Brandywine Village, right there. Brandywine Village was turned into one of the most important manufacturing centers in the colonies and later in our new nation. Soon they shipped their flour to many East Coast ports, to the Caribbean, to Europe and beyond, and became very, very prosperous. The flour milled here changed history. During the Revolution, Quakers' flour, secretly sent behind enemy lines, was baked into bread that fed the troops of George Washington at the Battle of the Brandywine and prevented his troops from starvation during the winter at Valley Forge in 77-78. Washington credited the Quaker millers' flour with sustaining his troops so they could ultimately defeat the British. We are an independent nation today, thanks in part to the Brandywine Quaker millers. Seeking religious freedom, Quakers came to the New World, many traveling here in 1682 with the English Quaker William Penn, who established Pennsylvania. And you all remember that Delaware was once the three colonies, the three counties in Delaware were all part of Pennsylvania. As a religious safe haven, Quakerism which began in England in the mid-1600s, when religious dissenters sought to simplify Protestant beliefs. They wanted a direct relationship with God, with no clergy interceding. Guided by the principles of equality, simplicity, peace, and integrity, they became respected for fair dealing with all. They were pacifists and abolitionists and worshiped in simple meeting houses that dotted the landscape which Quakers use today. Precisely because they were fellow Quakers, millers like, and you'll recognize these names, millers like Tatnall, Canby, Shipley, Lee, Poole, Marshall, Starr, Price, Shallcross, Grubb, They all trusted each other over many generations. Their children intermarried, consolidating family wealth. They worked together industriously as a cooperative, not as rivals. They strove for the highest quality product, making Brandywine superfine flour a brand that was in demand for its purity, whiteness, and reliable baking qualities. Wilmington's natural assets also ensured success. Its location in a fine wheat growing region, its site on the fall line guaranteeing a steep elevation drop needed to turn millstones as the river drops 168 feet in the last 3 miles before arriving at the Tidewater. Market Street is the Tidewater mark. And close access to the sea. So ocean-going ships could come upriver on the tide, dock at the mills, receive their cargo, and quickly set sail again. Quaker miller Oliver Canby, who lived 1716 to 1754, championed the far-sighted flour production strategy of merchant milling. That was the foundation of the Quakers' brilliance in their growth industry. A custom miller, which was prefatory to being a merchant miller, was you would grind a farmer's grain and take a portion of the grain for yourself. Canby said, I'll buy everything you have for a fair price, and then I'll do with the product what I choose to do. So he then he controlled its quality during milling, pioneering sifting technology that created the much desired superfine flour, controlling where the flour was sold and at what price. Soon other Quakers built mills at the Tidewater, and then they built or bought ships to transport the wheat flour and much later cornmeal. It was the first instance that we're aware of vertical integration. So they owned the flour, they owned the mill, they owned the ship, they captained the ship, they sent the ship where they wanted, and when they sold the flour overseas, they brought back what they wanted. They brought back spices and rum and whatever they wanted to bring back to Delaware. They controlled the market for decades, setting the price for flour in the young nation. The millers became wealthy, and as early adopters of milling automation, they were among the pioneers of the Industrial Revolution. By 1815, 14 Quaker-owned mills around the Tidewater ground 500,000 bushels of wheat a year. But as the nation grew, increased competition curbed their dominance. Farmers in Maryland, Virginia, and New York, and points west began growing fine wheat as well. New mills arose elsewhere. Over time, the costly hazards of floods, what could she be talking about? Ice flows and mill fires took their toll. By 1890, all the South Bank mills had been sold to the city of Wilmington for their new water pumping station near Market Street, and the North Bank mills fell silent. So there you go, a little fun fact or two about Quaker millers. Anything else? More questions perhaps from the floor?
So you didn't talk about any dams above dam number 6, right?
Right.
There's a whole bunch of dams above number 6. In fact, there's one not very far above it at Breck's Mill.
Yes, number 7, right.
And then there's one just above that one at Hagley.
Yes.
So it would be great if you could get above those dams and above the one at Rockland Road, because it's mostly all clear and dam free for a long way after that.
You're damn right.
All the way up into way up into Pennsylvania.
Mike, thank you very much. So the question was, we all heard, what are you doing about the Hagley dams? Hagley owns every dam above the X Station Dam. They own the dam at Breck's Mill and every dam behind the Hagley Gates. They own 4 mills, 4 dams.
Some of them were small, though. Some were big.
Quite right, quite right. They, and one of the reasons we wanted Hagley to join our group as a sponsoring partner was because we wanted their cooperation as we made our way upstream. The truth is that the guy who was running Hagley at the time, David Cole, has now gone on to another job. But he said, Hunt, he said, I regard this effort to restore the Brandywine to its pre-colonial free-flowing state as a part of the new Hagley story. It is public education. This is what we do. And so I suspect that we're going to have to help be Hagley's partner in fundraising for the removal and or modification of those important dams. Anybody else?
Because I'll make one other Zoom, and that would be Harold recommends a book called The Founding Fish by John McPhee.
Heartily recommended by not only the questioner, but by myself. If you hadn't read any John McPhee in your life, you've missed something. Boy, this guy, he wrote the first book he wrote was about Bill Bradley at Princeton. And the story he told about Bill Bradley in 300 pages, you just couldn't imagine how hard the guy worked and what a smart guy he was and what a great athlete he was and what a great human being he was. Far off the shad question, but he wrote this book called The Founding Fish, and it is magical. It really is. He talks lyrically about his experience shad fishing on the Delaware and shad fishing on the Susquehanna, and it's just great, great stuff. He talks about he was standing on a boulder. His canoe was anchored next to the boulder, and he felt the canoe touching his leg. He said, "Time to go, time to go, time to go." And that half an hour after he left the rock, the flood came, and it was time to go. Terry.
The dam at just south of the Brandywine Creeks, downstream from the Brandywine Creek State Park at the Rockland Road. That was very, very difficult to take a canoe across because of the people at the apartments had it that made it very inconvenient for people to go through. But how have you got on with them?
You're talking about the dam just below where the Bancroft Mills were? Okay. That dam is owned by the state. It is people engineers who talk about dams talk about river right and river left. If you're standing up on the dam, river right is your right hand, river left is your left hand. You're looking downstream. So the dam is badly damaged on river right. There are a fairly good sized hole pre-Ida in its downstream face. The capstones were tilting from river right toward the center of the dam. And if we have had any luck at all, the cavity will be bigger. When the state got a hold of the dam by trading a property, Terry, they were quoted as saying, and this is in 2017, that our intent is the demolition of the dam. Well, we're still pecking away at that. Mother Nature helps. Anything further? Well, ladies and gentlemen, here endeth the reading of the lesson.
Thanks so much, Hunter. That was great and super interesting, and thanks. One, before you all leave, we had a request from Suzanne to talk about the speaker from earlier that you had something you wanted to say. Want to come up and share the information? You have to speak into the microphone and probably take your mask off while you do.
Oh, okay. So last year, we had Dr. Ann Boylan speak to us on the Centennial of women's suffrage. That was 1920 to 2020. And her book has just been published. And it's so interesting. And if you look in the index, you'll find a lot. If you look up Arden in the index, you'll find a whole lot of pages that are dedicated to suffragists from this community. And so we put a flyer up on the website, up on Facebook. And so, you know, and I also have that information here with me if anybody wants to look to find out how to buy it. I got mine on Amazon and it was super fast, but she'd probably prefer you go through Barnes and Noble, and you can get a discount that way. Either way, you can get a discount. Anyway, that's all. Thank you. Yes. Oh, it's Votes for Delaware Women, M. Boylan. She's a retired professor from the University of Delaware, a historian. And I just hope somebody here will buy the book or encourage somebody else to buy the book. It's really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks everybody for coming out for our first in-person. Thanks to the people on Zoom for participating. How many were there on Zoom? 21. So it's about our usual. It's a nice turnout. So thank you all. And we'll see you next month when we hear a talk on Amelia Earhart.